We are live.
Live, there we go. The awkwardness of waiting for the button to tell us that we're live. How's everyone going this week? I'm hoping that everyone's enjoyed their week, and let us know where you're joining from around the globe. If you're a regular, let us know in the comments as well. I've got a bit of a special episode. I'd say, Paul. We've had guests every couple of weeks, but as I always mention on the streams, I absolutely love Amplify. So we've brought Abdullah here. I guess, could you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about what you do. I heard rumors that you work with the Amplify team.
Absolutely. So my name is Abdullah Shaban, and I am the product manager for cross-platform app development frameworks, specifically for Amplify. And my focus primarily is going to be on advancing just the development on the Flutter and React Native library specifically for Amplify. So super excited to be a part of this. Thank you so much for pulling me in, Matt. I'm very, very new to AWS. I've actually joined the team about a month ago at this point. It's been a month and 2 days to be specific. So very, very new, super excited to just hear a lot of the questions coming out of the community, trying to be as engaged as possible to try to really understand whether we're building the right things and just making sure that we're continuing to be building the right things. And fun fact, this is actually my first ever live stream. So a little bit nervous, but yeah, I'm hoping this all goes great.
I mean, it can't be as bad as Matt and I when we first did it. We were like,
yeah.
I'm pretty scared. Yeah, you'll be fine and you'll get used to it. But it's like it'd be good to hear where everybody is. Like, for anybody new, Matt and I are in Melbourne, and it's like really cold today. This week I don't have any rain, so that's good. But it is actually very, very cold. And Abdallah, where are you from?
So right now I am in San Diego, California. That's home base for me. So it's definitely a little bit chilly here, which we're not used to. Definitely gotten spoiled by the California weather. So
Nice. Yeah. And I was going to say, we've got San Diego represent. So we've got someone from San Diego here. We've got somebody else in the comments. It's like, you're doing great. Don't be nervous. So I wish they were there for our week one as well, right? Like Paul and I kind of like just, made our way through it and fumbled. But I guess that's part of the show, right? Like, we put devs in the shed together, like this weekly live stream that we're all on now. And, we've had like a fantastic audience each week supporting us. But I did the count, and it was like, we've done 24 episodes since we started or something, right? So we've run for like half a year now. The whole point of the show was just to show people like, our learning process, how we keep ahead of things and how we play with tools and bring in guests and really kind of like help maybe augment a bit of the development community that's out there as well. Paul and myself are definitely not, perfect. We don't know everything. We have over 200 AWS services, and when we have conversations, everyone's like, they ask about like the tiniest detail in one particular service, and you're like, I'll look into that for you, right? And so half of our learning, like legitimately, is let's Google it, let's read through the AWS docs, right? And I think that surprises people, but like being a bit more transparent with that process shows that everyone in the same boat together, and you can actually get ahead of the game pretty easily. And I guess the other thing was like, putting it in our sheds, right? Like at the start of this year, halfway through when we started the streams, like I was in a shed. Now I'm in a bit of a cabin in my backyard. Paul's kept to his sheds. He's got Ethernet running there for a stable connection. But the whole thing was like, we're around all of our tools, so you can kind of pick stuff up and go for it at the end of the day. Like I've got, if I duck, like let the autofocus end, like I've got like a little NVIDIA GPU up there. I've got like some Raspberry Pis, and then I've got like a whole bunch of different tools that I use, for electronics. And in my actual shed, I've got all the chainsaws and everything else that's fun. So yeah, Abdullah, we're really happy to have you on the show today. I know that you want to ask the community some things as we go, and feel free to ask anything Amplify related in the chat. We'll try and answer. And Abdullah's been around, for a number of weeks in the Amplify team as well. So we'll do our best to kind of explain some of the things that you might want to know about it, but very specifically, like I think React Native and and Flutter, you're keen to hear learning experiences, right, from anyone that's used either of those two frameworks, I guess, in the past, and used Amplify with them.
Absolutely.
So,
I think
yeah.
as we're going through, like basically going through the code, I would just love to hear from people that are joined us to basically, once we start adding categories into our project and we're building it up, what do you like about auth? What are the things that you don't like about auth? What are the problems that you've had while using it? And as we go through the categories, just please ask as many questions as you can. And whatever feedback that you have for us are things that I'm going to be taking back to our engineering team to try to see how we can make your developer experience just as best as we can.
It's really interesting, like you say that, because last week, like I've got like one specific customer that have got their platform, they've moved it to Amplify. They had quite a legacy stack, EC2, but hosting like web server, but on EC2. They wanted something simple. They wanted a bit of a pipeline and a bit more rigor around what they were doing. But the organization itself was small, and had to sort of take, I guess, like smaller baby steps. And the first thing that I talked to them about was like, maybe you could get your front end application and use Amplify to go ahead and set that up and host it. And they went ahead and did that, and they loved it. The team just loved it. They weren't aware of what was available and how easy that was. So they had pipelines, they had different environments. Then they hooked up their SSL certificates. And then the next biggest thing was they said, we want to migrate this from one account to the other. So I helped them through that, which was fairly easy, but you sort of have to be careful about the order in which you create and delete the domains so you don't have some confusion there. But really, really easy. But last week they sent me an email saying, oh, we're thinking about whether or not we should move our hosting to like directly to CloudFront and S3, or what we should do there. And I was like, let me ask the question first, like why? What are you hoping to get out of it? Like, what is causing the problem at the moment? And we sort of had a chat and we caught up, and they were like, nothing. Like, it's actually worked really, really well. It's very easy for us to manage. There's zero downtime from what we've had. We're really happy with the way it manages and creates our certificates for the domains and runs the preview environments. We can password protect the early environments. And they're like, we're not going to do this. Like that would just be extra work that we just don't need. We don't need to build custom pipelines. We don't need to set up all this customization. We like Amplify the way it is, and we have some extra rules around cores and so forth that they've got put in there for headers. And so yeah, it's like it's a good product. It can be sometimes like overlooked with how much work you're actually saving by not over baking what you're trying to build.
Absolutely. And that's the value statement that Amplify really truly has, is removing friction from the development experience, right? And how can we take a lot of the things that you have to do in order for you to be able to manage your backend, very foundational things that any app would have, like the most common use cases. Those are the things that basically Amplify tries to take over for you and just provide you with a lot of interfaces for you to be able to interact with Amplify that simplifies your whole development experience. And then on top of that, the benefit of using Amplify is not just the whole starting up and creating an MVP for your product or creating a new app. It's also the fact that it rides on top of all of our existing AWS services. So that means if you hit a certain gap or hit a certain limit in terms of how your app scales, then you can go in and basically customize all of those AWS services to match your needs. So that's really the power. We give you the ability to be able to quick start your app and build it up, and then also scale. And I think really, truly, that's where Amplify shines.
Yeah. Well, one other thing that I'll ask is, Matt and Abdallah, if we come up with a good question, we got a swag item this week to give away. So like last week we had no answers for our question, so like I've stocked that up. But if we think up a good question, I'll be able to post a link in, and we'll be able to securely grab your details. And so let's just think of something as we go through today, maybe one of the questions or an answer or some specific detail that will go out, and we'll ask a question at some point during the show. And then we'll be able to get a piece of swag out, and we should be able to send that worldwide as well.
Yeah, that's right. And I think I've got some leftover swag from a couple of events recently, right? So I've got some Echo Dots, like some Fire TVs, some T-shirts. I think, Paul, you've got some cups So yeah, like I don't know. Maybe we'll have to decide during the stream what the prize could be, depending on like the question, right? But yeah, please in the chat let us know if you've used Amplify before. I think one of my favorite things about it is really, and I don't think it's documented well enough, right? Oh no, you missed the Mac episode. I apologize, right? Like I'll give you the link to the GitHub if you want to follow through as well. I do want to kind of pick that up and finish the Mac build pipeline as well, because we ran out of time last time daily push. So we'll get that done. But yeah, like the thing that I like about Amplify is exactly that, right? Like I've used a lot of these types of frameworks in the past, and usually they're built for a very particular purpose, like to do one flow really, really well. But I think the thing like that I've learned with Amplify is because it's really about making the services available in like a semi-abstracted way, but you can dive into the depth of them. I found that I've been able to break out a lot more than I've had with other products that are like similar-ish in the past when I've worked with them in startups, right? So, the other day I wanted some customizations to my Lambda that I was creating in the backend with Amplify. I just updated a bit of the cloud formation, right? That was generated, and I stuck in like a bigger Lambda, and I had that Lambda join the VPC, and then then I could access my RDS instance. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that you can do that's really clever under the hood. So yeah, thanks, Paul. I think I'll give the GitHub. I'll give a link to my GitHub as well, because on my GitHub, I'll just do this in the background. I did have steps once you got to the command line in the Mac to get Fastlane working for certain use cases. So let me dive in that. I think I just did it with my standard Amplify sample app. So I'm just pasting that in the chat. Yeah, let us know if you've used Amplify, what your thoughts are, even if you've just dabbled with it and you wouldn't call yourself an expert, just like thoughts and feedback would be interesting. Today, we are going to explore a little bit of the Flutter side. So we've got this cool workshop that we've been taking customers through in ANZ and a couple of customers over in EMEA. I am going to show everyone what that looks like. It was actually most of the heavy lifting was done by a colleague named James. We'll have James come on the show at some point and take us through the lab. We've been developing it as Flutter's expanded, because Flutter had some major releases this year, right? It had there was major updates to Dart, the programming language underneath. There was like null safety introduced into the Flutter framework. They started to support more than mobile on the Flutter side as well. So it's kind of had rapid progress, I'd say, in the last year or so. So what I always do is I do a Flutter Doctor command, if I remember correctly. And what this does is this just lets me know, it's like my pre-flight check, right, to make sure that everything's up to date. Every week that I do it, usually there's an update to Flutter that I take down, or Android Studio's got an update and wants me to accept licenses. You can see that my iPhone's not plugged into my computer, so I'm okay with that, but it looks like I've got all the other checks in gear, right? So when I'm setting up Flutter and I want to use Amplify, like I always make sure to just make sure that Flutter Doctor is up to date. You can stick to particular versions as well. So for a fair while I was working on null safety within my apps, I stuck to like Flutter 1.x. So I didn't take it up to 2. And then once I had compatibility for null safety, I went to 2.0 free, I think it was at the time. And then we've had 2.2, 2.5, and then numerous iterations in the past through that. So Flutter Doctor looks to be on order, right? So what I'll do next is I'm just going to go and launch the application that I built.
There's a question. I'll pop it up and then I'll just read through it. And they said, what experience level of developer do you folks think Amplify benefits the most? If I'm just learning Flutter, will it be beneficial to try picking up immediately, or is it most suited to teams based around MVP building versus individual projects?
I actually love this question. I think, first of all, obviously this is an anime fan, Kurosaki Itachi, so Bleach and Naruto, I think. Anyways, so for basically, I think for Amplify, it's definitely not specific to just teams that are building MVP products. Even for individual developers, that's really where the power shines for Amplify, because you don't actually have basically the need for you to have such a deeper understanding of full stack development in order for you to be able to quickly be able to spin up a backend for you. So I would say, if anything, if you're an individual developer building an app by yourself and you want basically to be able to spin up an app quickly, then the process of adding categories like auth, authentication, or adding a database that you can interact with using are either data store or GraphQL, which is mechanisms of interacting with your backend, is really simple and easy. Our documentation does a great job of highlighting how you can do that as well. And then on the other hand, if you're actually basically thinking of growing this product and then adding additional members to your team, and then there comes the complexity of having to create multiple development environments and how you set those up and how you connect those to your Git pipelines, then Amplify also supports that. And it really streamlines the process of collaboration when building an app. So I would say there isn't really a limitation on either sides of the spectrum.
The product that I was talking about, or the customer I was talking about, they've got a team of multiple members and they're all working in different environments with Amplify. But I also know, and Matt and I know another individual that's got one developer working with him and himself, and he's used Amplify for a lot of his application. And really, I would say, I would almost go so far to say that he saved himself, 6 months to a year worth of like messing around, because things just happened and he was able to get going and build something when the need arose. And I would say, I mean, I'm not like, floating our own boat here, but without it, maybe his product would never have made it to market. Like, because, when you're spinning your wheels trying to like set up pipelines and all this sort of work, when you've got a limited amount of time, or limited amount of like, funding to get your app into a state where you can get some investors, you want to do that as quick as possible. And this particular individual didn't have a great deal of like CI experience, and now had like an environment that just worked, that he didn't have to like go ahead and poke around with servers, and didn't have to worry far less about the security of making sure there's an EC2 instance or something was secured, or VPS somewhere was like secured properly. He knew that once I published my SPA, it's on CloudFront and S3. Whether or not he knew what CloudFront and S3 were, it doesn't matter, but he knows that it can scale basically indefinitely.
Yeah, I think from my experience as well, like diving into a little bit of that question as well, like, like I work within the enterprise space, looking after customers that have enterprise support. I love developing with Amplify because I came from startup land, which is quite different to that space. And the cool thing about startup land is you need to build quickly, and Amplify kind of delivers on that. But I also, like, all the time, surprisingly, there's large enterprises, like many large enterprises that are using Amplify, right? They might have IoT projects. They might have front ends that they just need off. There's ones that are using like AppSync at scale and some pretty awesome, crazy AppSync patterns, and they're using the Amplify libraries to basically connect their front end apps and their dashboards into AppSync. So you kind of be surprised, like that this kind of, I think 2 years ago, I would say, we were just getting started with Amplify, right? 2 or 3 years ago, like we were still building all these tools. And I think over the last like year or so, I've just seen so many more use cases for it, but I've also seen the community adopt it more heavily, and a lot of maturity in the functionality with Amplify, right? And we've got customers that like break things up, right? Some use the CLI, some don't, which is really fascinating for me, right? So you can import your existing resources. Some just choose like just to enable particular bits to help them move fast, right? And they might do that, so they can move quickly, but then they decide to keep it as they kind of keep going with the product. So yeah, it's crazy. Really good question. Let us know what you think. What I've done is I've brought up a mobile app, and I'm just going to put in some details. Create a user. This is actually like what we've built in the workshop. I know that we always run over time, so I'm not going to actually do the workshop. It takes about like 2 hours to do end to end. So I'm going to create a user. I'm going to go through what the app looks like, what the app does, And then what we'll do is we'll go through a little bit of the Amplify console, have a look at the code. We'll keep this fairly informal, right? So ask questions as we go. It doesn't have to necessarily be around the project. We're here to answer anything and everything. We just thought we'd show something off that's been developed recently. I am going to put in a very secure password for this demo. This is just a blowaway account. Yeah. Definitely an Amplify fan, right? I've never let that be a secret, I think. Actually, I need to sign up. I need to create a new user. So I'll just type in some temporary details. And sign up a new user. Like this is actually all using Cognito in the background, right? So this is a Flutter-based application I've got running on Android. It runs on iOS as well. I've got a login screen. This was actually created by James. So he was the guy that worked on the workshop locally. And I think Mo helped out as well. I saw Mo was in the comments as well. He's helped with testing and a bunch of other things around this workshop too. But the first step is like to have a sign up screen, a login screen, all completely customized and coded from scratch, right? And we just use the Amplify libraries under the hood to bring in Cognito. I could show you what that code looks like. From there, we've actually enabled settings in Cognito for two-factor. So when I sign up a new account, I'm just getting a verification code that needs to be entered. And then I have a map render. And because we're based in Melbourne, I set the location to Melbourne. Now, I'm always more of an iOS guy, right? So I always struggle to use Android devices. So don't judge me if I'm really bad at navigating around. But what we've done after that is I've got this little pin here, right? Like starting in Pasco Vale. I think if I hit the button above, if I remember correctly, it's a pin. No, it's not going to start driving. But what we can actually do is we're using just this mapping tool. It's not Amazon location at the moment. We'll migrate the workshop over to Amazon location at some point. But like this is just like open maps or open street maps, I think, if I remember the name. We've dropped this pin, and then what we wanted to do is we wanted to track the position for like a real-time dashboard in the background. So if the company wants to make sure that deliveries are happening successfully to customers, or customers can see deliveries, we're thinking a food delivery app. The driver will actually have their pin move, and then that location is then synced in the back end with App Sync and Data Store and DynamoDB. And so, like with that syncing of the user information, we're basically just storing GPS coordinates. And whenever the GPS coordinate changes, we update the back end, and then all the clients that like want to have a look at this view as to where that vehicle is can see that, right? So the solution's fairly simple, right? But we've got authentication at the start to log in, and then we've basically got App Sync doing a lot of the heavy lifting as like the GraphQL communication layer to DynamoDB, and then also like using a bit of Data Store just to store stuff locally on the device as well. So this is just like one example app, right? That was quite simple. I think James built it, and I did bits and pieces around the maps, and it took us just like a weekend together to put all this together. So it is a fairly simple app, but really well constructed considering the time frame. And then as Flutter is updated, as like Amplify is adding in features, we've also done the same for the application as well. So let's have a look at like what's actually needed from the Amplify side, right? So I'm just going to get a different screen share happening. Any comments from the audience? Let us know what you think. Paul and Abdullah, you can judge me, of course, in terms of the quality. It could look a lot slicker. I know I don't have a graphics designer.
I think like the main thing is like that it can be difficult to work out how to do like live updates or streaming updates, and setting that up with like sockets and connections to be able to like have a backend that can follow something that we're moving through. I know like it was like probably 2 months ago or something that we talked about our game and we used the Amplify libraries to do that. However, we weren't publishing, or actually we were publishing with Amplify, but we it was very unobtrusive the way we were using Amplify. So we coded the exact way we wanted to. We were using what was the framework called, Matt?
We were using Phaser JS, right?
Phaser
So
JS. So yeah,
yep.
so Phaser JS to build a game, but we were using Amplify and AppSync via Amplify to be able to do like live updates, and it was just such a seamless experience to hook the two together.
I'm just posting the link to the workshop, right? Test out and give feedback. I always seem to talk as I type, right? So you should see that through on the chat as well. If you want to have a run through at some point, I'm more than happy for you to hit us up on Twitter or LinkedIn or just on the YouTube channel as well with any comments or next week in the show when we're on AWS Twitch. We're gaining a lot of feedback on this particular lab, but it was less about the lab today, and it was more about having Abdullah join us and answer anything that came in from the Amplify front. Actually, before I show my code, let's actually have a look at that link, right? So I'll get the screen sharing up. So it's not an official workshop just yet, so you guys are getting a bit of a sneak peek. We hope to make it an official workshop at some point. So there's bits and pieces that need to clean up, but there's the prerequisites that you need. So most of this is just around getting Flutter Doctor to work by installing Flutter and doing a whole bunch of stuff on the front end. We've got everything broken into modules. The first module is really around making a login and sign up screen, not even bringing Amplify into the equation for Cognito Auth just yet. And then we start to configure Amplify in module 2. So that's when we start to bring in authentication. Module 3, we continue bits and pieces. So we've done the steps to just kind of bring in the library and initialize an Amplify project. Then we bring in Cognito and do all the cool stuff and actually make it work to our Cognito backends. Module 4, we look at data store and GPS location storing. And module 5, we add a map to help people visualize that hopefully one day will be Amazon location. I've had James have some ideas on how to bring that in. I've also had Aaron, who's a regular on the show if people watch. Aaron's got some creative ideas around creating a Lambda and being able to get map tiles from the back end as well. So we might go down that path.
And I do want to mention that Amplify has now a new category called Amplify Geo for basically supporting bringing in a map and also doing things like adding pins and being able to support these types of use cases that you had mentioned in your sample app, Matt. That's definitely something that's not supported right now in Flutter, but that's one of the things that we have in our backlog.
Yeah, that's exactly it. So if you actually want to play with Amplify Geo, right, like our mapping solution, you can with JavaScript at the moment. So have a look at the Amplify docs. If you've got some location-based projects, we have done a whole episode on Amplify Geo / Amazon location as well. So that was the session where we brought Aaron on. He talked about his experience with mapping software and working in GSI space. So that was pretty cool as well. Feel free to run through the workshop in your own pace if you want. That link is in the chat or in the comments there. As we always say as well, always make sure to clean up your resources. I don't want anyone hitting me up saying that they accidentally left things on and had a large charge come through on their card. We expect that most of the resources in this lab, or pretty much all of them, should be on free tier. But if you leave them running for 24 months and you forget about them, you might get a charge. So we kind of want to resist that, right? Or if you accidentally launch a larger size instance, or you have many API calls or whatever it is, we always recommend cleaning up. So that's just on the lab side. I guess actually, before I go into the code side and the project that I created, one of the things that I'm really impressed about is the documentation for Amplify, right? So I don't know how many of you've seen it. Let us know in the chat. But you can see there's documentation for every framework, which is pretty neat, right? When I usually look at documentation, it's just JavaScript, Flutter Dart, Swift, Android. Whereas on JavaScript especially, we've got all the actual frameworks there as well, the Next.js example, because half of it's server-side rendered. React for web, React Native for mobile, Angular's there, Ionic, and I've also seen people adopt adapt these from JavaScript into like Svelte and the billion other frameworks that are in the JavaScript landscape that I occasionally play with too.
And that's a really, really important thing for us on the Amplify side. Like one of the biggest things that we try to respect is the fact that we understand that there's a lot of passion that developers feel for the platforms and the frameworks that they decide to use. So a big part of how our documentation is written is respecting the boundaries of the developer experience within each framework. So absolutely, Matt, that's a very, very important piece for us when it comes to how we communicate out features and how we build out our features.
Nice, excellent. Sometimes I have a bit of JavaScript fatigue, so that's probably why I ducked into the Flutter side. It's a very, very fast expanding space, right? Like if anyone watched Modern Apps, I built a Next.js app like a couple of weeks ago, and that was actually really fun. I like the fact that some of these frameworks are thinking of going back to server side, which makes like thumbnail rendering, a little bit harder, but it makes like, getting metadata about the user, analytics about the user, quite a lot easier. It makes like other things like, and this is all subjective, right? It also makes like things like Google Analytics and such a little bit easier to track as well, right? Like we've got a lot of ways that we can do SEO with React, but like it was kind of catching up to some of the server side frameworks, rendered frameworks previously.
Matt, did you see the question from Level Up, Josh?
Yeah, so how difficult is it to tweak cloud? Let me put it up. CloudFormation that Amplify generates, or is this the paradigm instead to just let Amplify handle all the configurations and not dive into the weeds there? So that's a really good question. I guess I guess I don't want to get myself into trouble, right? Because I do modify the CloudFormation myself. Yeah, so like there's two folders within an Amplify project, right? You've got the backend folder and you've got the current cloud config folder. In the backend folder, this is where all the things are that like Amplify will generate when you do an Amplify push. So this is kind of where I modify some things if I want to. Like I need to make sure if I'm working in a multi-developer team that that's kept consistent. So if I do a change to the CloudFormation that's going to get generated, I make sure that it's in the backend folder. So when another dev does, like a Git pull and then an Amplify pull, that they're working from the same code base that I've got, and they also get the current cloud configuration backend folder too, which will store the actual changes if I had done an Amplify push. So you can modify it. Absolutely. You've just got to be careful about the way that you do it, because it can become like a bit of a pain if you've gotten the steps wrong to modifying it, right? So I kind of view it as like an advanced thing that you could do. If you've got existing resources, like you've got another project that uses Cognito, and with this Cognito project, you're using it on other apps, you can also do Amplify config, which is going to be a safe way to import an asset that's basically stored within the cloud. I see other customers use CDK for exactly the same thing. So they might have a code base that generates everything for their app with CDK, and then they'll use the import functionality with an Amplify to basically do the imports. The one thing that I'd say is the space, like I think the Amplify team really cares about, and has been spending a lot of like their thought processes and mind around in the past year as well. So this will evolve over time as well, and will make it easier for developers, I hope.
Bless you.
Excuse me.
Yeah, bless you, Paul.
I worked on a project prior to working at AWS where we significantly modified the CloudFormation with what we're doing to customize the backend, to pull everything inside of VPC and set up some specific things for ourselves. And that worked pretty well. At first, it was a little confusing to figure it all out, but we had myself included, 4 members on that team that were working on it. So you can definitely go ahead and customize it. It's not completely hands-off.
Yeah, it's just more like thinking about how other developers can like pull the exact same settings, right? So whenever I've seen it break, it's usually been because like people have been kind of like following their own flows as a development team, and we've got specific guidance actually around this, if I remember correctly, right? Like if I go to I think it's, where is it? Is it guides? It is somewhere in the documentation actually where we recommend like practices around developing and working on Amplify projects. Maybe it's on the Amplify docs.
I think actually it might be within. I'll try to find that for you.
Yeah, try to find it, share it back. I thought there was an advanced section listed in guides.
I think it's in CLI probably. If you go to CLI and then advanced workflows.
Yeah, this is it. Mm-hmm. So like there's a whole bunch of advice, right? Like mono repos where you've got multiple apps in the one repo. There's some good advice on how to work, across multiple projects there. So local mocking is always a cool feature as well. Where are we? Actually, it's been separated into team environments above, I think. So if you've got like a shared single environment, like this is our best practice around working with it, right? So you've got like an Amplify pull command that'll be run after your Git pull. You've got the ability to have like a view mode as well. Like if you've got certain members of the team that are just working on the app's code, they without modifying any of the Amplify resources, they can do so through like just a view mode when they do an Amplify pull. All the advice is basically here for team environments, and if you follow through that, like it makes it a lot easier to look at like modifying the CloudFormation under the hood if you want to go down the CLI path, right? But there's so many other pathways as well, right? I've mentioned like some people are using CDK and just importing those resources like through like the ability to import existing resources. So there's guides in the documentation for that. Actually, here's the nice farm, right? That it kind of shows you like what the model looks like moving between environments as well. Like if you want your traditional dev, test, and prod, or dev, UAT, and prod. So that's all there as well.
And if you would go to the libraries section, Matt, and if you can click on authentication, and then getting started, I believe. So this is where, or was it create or use existing backend? Probably
it's this one. Yeah, like yeah. This is where you have this is it. Mm-hmm. Like when you call Amplify configure, right?
Yep, exactly.
And so you can have like existing auth. I've done this for chatbots actually. Like I did this for Lex. I imported Lex as an existing resource, which was pretty cool. I had a chatbot demo set of my accounts, and then I wanted to build into an app last minute decision. So bringing in those settings you can do like if you've created them in the back end already, or you've created them through CDK or another avenue, right? So yeah, like I guess the reason I had the documentation up like was just to show everyone like what the getting started looked like for Flutter, right? So you'd basically do if I even go back one, like if I go back to prerequisites, right? Like if I want to start a whole new project from scratch, I just make sure that I've got Node installed on my machine for the CLI. I've got Flutter installed. I've set my IDE up, so I've got some good guidance there. The workshop takes you through that as well. I've got an AWS account. But basically, like what I do is I install the Amplify CLI through curl or npm. I run an Amplify configure, so that allows me to connect my AWS account in the background up to Amplify. I can create a username, generate that in the console. I can set a preferred region if I'm working on one particular region that I want all the resources to basically be aligned to. So it walks through all of that. And then basically I go like, okay, now I'm in a Flutter project that I've created. Let's just do an Amplify init. And that init command through the CLI is going to effectively get the Amplify project an Amplify project up and running for that particular like Flutter project that I've got, which is really, really nice. So we'll do all the heavy lifting there. And then I can basically just go like after that, as a developer, Amplify add auth, and then it's going to generate Cognito in the back end. Like I can go into my account, I can go into Amplify, I can see the Cognito instance that it's created, right? So actually I could probably even show that. So
yeah, I would love it if you can show the admin UI. I think there's a lot of power there.
So if I go into Amplify, you can see it's an AWS service in the console. And basically, once I've done that amplify init command, it's going to create the Flutter project for me. And then as I go like amplify add auth or add APIs or add analytics or whatever, it's going to add each of these as components to my Flutter application. So this is like the mindset that I really like as a dev, right? Because life's complicated. I only care about my code, like when I'm developing something, right? I don't really care about all the other things that I'll have to worry about later on. There'll be things that will come up like, oh, Webpack's not working. Oh, this isn't working. And it's like, I will singularly think about what I'm building first, and then I will deal with the stuff when the stuff doesn't work. Like, I don't know if that's the best approach or not. It's just how I think of things, right? And the thing that I like about Amplify is like, I don't know or need to care that it's Cognito, right? Like, I just ran an Amplify add auth and I got my auth. And when I need to do something more sophisticated with auth, like have unauthenticated users have permissions to particular things that I've created in the database, or I need to like modify like my GraphQL API to have multiple models or something, right? Like I can slowly start to teach myself about the underlying services. So the CLI command might modify things for me. And you can see I'm like a big Amplify fan, so apologies to everyone, me geeking out. But like, I just go into Amplify API, right? And I'm like, oh, it is a GraphQL API. Like, I read a bit about that in the documentation. Okay, so AppSync's the service that does GraphQL. Okay, well, let's have a look at that, right? And then it breaks me out into the AppSync console, and it's like, oh, okay, so like. This is the schema that I created before in my app, right? Like I created this like little database table that I wanted. Okay. So like I was creating these points. Yeah, that's exactly what I put in my code, and I generated through an amplify push commands. That's cool. Oh, and I can see that it's done like some extra stuff, like it's generated variations and a whole bunch of extra stuff here, right? So I can start to lean in and work out like how AppSync works more. I'm like, yeah, but if AppSync's just the GraphQL component, like what's actually happening under the hood, right? So then I go, oh, well, it's actually in the data sources. I can see that it's created like this Amazon DynamoDB thing, right? Like, an NoSQL database. Okay, cool. Well, what is it actually created in Dynamo that all of this is actually saving back into? And because I haven't run the app for a little while, you can see it's not saving the location, but I would actually have a table listed here and all those same elements that I found in my schema, which is awesome. So then I can start to learn about how like Dynamo works in the back end. But I really love the fact that it's like I can just get started and I don't have to think about like the 50 different things that have been generated in AWS front until I need to customize and expand them for my use cases.
And let's make it even simpler, Matt. Let's go back to the Amplify console.
Here we go.
Okay, and if you go to the overview page. Oh. Oh,
you just mean the project?
Yes,
project
exactly.
page?
And then you go to set up admin UI.
Yeah.
That was just going to be my next question. How often do you go to there? And let's have a look in there.
Yeah, I think for really a Flutter developer, or let's say really an Amplify developer that is trying to use Amplify and starting to use auth, starting to use API, I would definitely say your first destination should be the admin UI. You can enable it from this screen, the admin UI management, and it would take maybe a couple of minutes for that to be enabled. And then from there, you'll get access to what we call the admin UI for Amplify. Within that, what's really, really great is, well, I don't want to ruin the surprise. Maybe we can wait for that to load and we can go in and we can walk through some of the screens and functionality there.
Yeah. You know what? I was really impressed with you guys this week. I messaged Paul. I did a thing. Yeah, cliffhanger, right? We'll wait.
Yeah.
I messaged Paul. I'm like, those Amplify guys, they're reading my minds. Like, I didn't even know that they're working on this feature, right? Like, I'm part of the extended Amplify team. And like, Paul and I have been working on a project for a presentation in the next couple of weeks, like around using AWS Personalize to personalize support pages that might be valuable to someone that's, doing their their banking or doing like working with their telco, right? And it's like we were using Amplify. We were using Personalize to basically like predict areas that could help that consumer based on the products that they had, the product categories, and what other users that were like them. Yeah, so we're customizing their experience, and we're doing all that through the front end. We'll show it off like in a couple of weeks. It's one of the things that we've got on the agenda for later. But so getting to the story, Personalized required me to create like 1,000 to 10,000 fake records.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yep. So you know where I'm heading with this now?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'm like, okay, so like Python, we're going to use Faker, and we're gonna get all this done and stuff done. And I wrote in like an hour like this Python script to generate like a CSV with all these fake users that I could load into Personalized, because Personalized wanted a CSV, right? Mm-hmm. I was like, this is so cool. Like I hadn't used Faker before. This is amazing. Like this really helps me like with my testing. Mm-hmm. And then like the next day, I'm checking the AWS announcements. Mm-hmm. See, Amplify supports Faker now. Like you could just generate it right out of the box. I was like,
absolutely.
Wow. Yeah.
Yep. I believe it's just been a week at this point that's been live. So
everyone's had to use something like that. And it's like, how do I create like ASD, hundreds of users, quickly got to find some sort of like random API to generate fake data or something. So
fake emails, fake locations, like fake addresses, like everything, right? Like, yeah.
Let's do it. Let's go into general and then click on. That's actually. Can we click on all apps at the top?
Yep.
And then go into the Flutter application, and then edit backend.
Edit backend.
Right under.
It's the bright orange button.
Yeah.
Daily Push's got a question for you, Abdallah. Does it Amplify actually use the Faker API, or does Amazon just replicate it? Like, how does it work?
I do believe we actually use the Faker API. I'm not entirely sure if it's the Faker. Actually, I'm going to take that back. I'm not entirely sure. That's something I'm going to have to ask.
Well, I think if I remember correctly, like Faker was a package rather than an API, right? Like, so
I believe so.
That's what I thought. Like, it didn't call an API. It just generated all this stuff locally. Like,
yeah, Paul and I were actually talking about turning it into an API to let other people generate things really quickly in their non-Python apps, just to kind of add back something that's quite handy for everyone.
Yeah, so absolutely. I think let's start with going into data on the setup, the left side.
Cool. Yeah.
So in here is, I think this is really, really one of the coolest things in the admin UI, especially because I feel like one of the things that I struggle with whenever I'm building an app is, what does my data model need to look like? And what are the different fields that I need? How do I create relationships between my data model in order for it to all the data make sense and have those relationships that are going to make my data make sense? Like the best example that we always use internally is a blog. So you have your actual blog, and then you have posts, and then you have comments within them, and how do you create the relationship between these three separate objects? And this is where the data modeling screen, I feel like, is so powerful. You have the ability to create your models, and then after you create them visually and put in the names that you need for all of the fields, if you click on the point data model as well, for example, you can also see that you can add your authorization rules as well, which is really, really cool. So you can set up your authorization rules, whether those are at the API key level or whether they use user pools. So that means a user is actually logged in and you're using their active session to verify their identity, or, for example, adding in customizable groups as well for when users are registered. So that's really cool. And then what's even cooler is that you can even do that at the individual field level as well. So you can click on, for example, the latitude or longitude field and be able to add these additional verifications. I believe that's, yeah. So it's really, that's like, I feel like one of the coolest things that you can do here. And then whenever you make your changes and you're done with that, you click on save and deploy at the top right-hand side. And then all of those changes are basically done on the cloud side of Amplify. And then after that, you can basically pull in all of the changes that are done on the admin UI locally into your app for you to be able to start then using your new data model.
So you would then, like, you could go ahead and edit and change your model, because you know, it can be hard to like do modeling within code.
Absolutely.
Edit your model, and then do an amplify pull after you've saved and deployed. Do an amplify pull, and then you've got that model locally, and you can continue on.
Absolutely. Like personally, I've never at this point in time had to build the model myself in code, just because I've had the data model screen available from the admin UI. That's always my go-to whenever I'm building like a small app, a small like POC that I'm showing somebody, for example, or like I'm building like a trip management application for me and my friends whenever we travel, just to have a place where we can drop our itinerary and be able to map out activities and things like that. That's what I've used to model all of my really underlying data.
Matt, is your app connected up at the moment? Go ahead and add a field, then do an amplify pull, and let's have a look.
Yeah, it is. It's somewhat. Let me have a look. I'll go back. I'll go out of the console, right? And I'll go to VS Code. And so I've got the app folder, right? And inside of that, if I remember how we want to do this, like I've got my current cloud backend, right? That's the execs. Those are the resources that are created for this particular account, this particular region, this environment. But in the backend folder, I have more of the stuff that's like quite loose, right? So in the API subfolder of that, I've got my schema, and this is where I built my schema. And the cool thing about that backend folder is that's not doing anything in any cloud environment right now, right? That's just defining that whenever I do an amplify init, like these are the settings that it should build in that particular account or region, right? So that's how I kind of do like dev, UAT, and prod, as well as how I kind of do sample code, right? Like that current cloud backend folder is exactly
I guess that's not to be confused with like backend being like, when you think about front end, back end, like that back end is not just like APIs or whatever. That's right.
Well, that's like your generic backend, right? Whereas this is like your exact backend because you've done an amplify push.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm always terrible at articulating. So, but in the schema, like, you know, like as a developer, if I was to go like, I don't know, I lack creativity today, right? Like I need a third coffee. So I'm just going to go like, I'm going to create this test field. And it's going to be like a string. Like I can save that. And then, you know, if I did like an amplify status, if I remember correctly.
And this command will tell you if there's a difference between your local development environment and then your cloud development environment.
Yeah, I haven't actually done for this particular project the full init, but I'd actually get a list of those changes, right? I think the project that I'm dealing with in my web folder is another instance, another Amplify project from my MacBook M1 when I might have been building some stuff personally for the workshop. But I would see like the difference. And the next thing is if I did an Amplify push, right? Like if I did that command, I would see the same stuff. I'd see what the differences are that I'm creating in the cloud. But it would also ask me like for, and I love this part, like code gen, right? So like, do you want to generate the variations of how to interact with this GraphQL? And I'm like, yeah, awesome. And so like inside of the lib folder, what I get is I get like all these things that are created by Amplify in the models folder, which help me interact with, you know, like basically like CRUD operations for my application. So, you know, like I'm using AppSync in GraphQL, so it's more going to be around, you know, mutation and subscription and all that type of stuff. So mutation might be the updates and deletes and the creates from the CRUD world. You've got the option to basically do the gets when it comes to getting like information or viewing information that's existing in the backend. But then you've also got like the WebSockets like side of the equation. So if I wanted to do real-time messaging in my app, I can use subscriptions and I can have the app listen for changes in the database and then pull those back and then show them to the end user. Or I could have like a visualization, you know, app that I might have built for like my admins, so they can see what's happening across users in the app in real time.
And
so all that's all. Yeah, go ahead.
And actually, let's talk about that. Let's talk about seeing the data that users have actually been interacting with in the app. Can we go back to the admin UI, please?
Yeah, let's go back. Let me get
So I would say my second coolest thing that I like about the admin UI is also the fact that you also get sort of an out-of-the-box CMS as well, a content management system for you to be able to see your data. So if we go to content at the top left-hand side, you actually, so it seems like because your model was not deployed yet, so you wouldn't be able to see this screen yet. But basically what you would see here is all of the data that is already populated within DynamoDB behind the scenes. And from there, you're also able to interact with that data as well. You're able to make changes to it. And if you're, for example, subscribed to those changes on your app, whether that is by using Data Store or by subscribing to changes through GraphQL, then you get those updates in real time, whether those are changes that are done from the user or from the backend, which is really, really cool and really powerful.
Nice. And I am doing an Amplify init in the background because I want to see some of the stuff working, right? So I'm going to recreate this app, although I know that we've only got 4 minutes left, right? Okay, so I might as well show that, right? So I'll go back to, I wish I could share my whole screen with everyone, but it comes across funny in the stream as an ultra wide. So that's kind of why I flick around a lot. So I've just done an Amplify init, and it's picked up like that this is actually a Flutter project already. It's picked up like a bunch of stuff. Actually, let me just make sure that
in this specific Flutter project, Matt, you could be doing this for Android or iOS, right? Like Amplify isn't restricted to just like Android or iOS, right?
Yeah, that's right. So basically, when you do an initialization of a Flutter project, you get to choose the platforms that you want the release to. So I've gone in with iOS and I've gone in with Android, and so those two folders have all the build resources. I'll just say no. And Amplify 48. There we go. So like, yeah, in here I've got like basically like my build files like for Android, and so you can see like if you're an Android developer, you can see your manifests, your Gradles, you can see the app project, all of that stuff's generated through Flutter. On the iOS front, you've got like the same thing, right? So it's got like an Xcode workspace, an Xcode project. You've got like your plist files for configurations, like you've got all that kind of stuff. And then you could add other platforms, right? Like you can add web if you wanted, or you could add like desktop or some of the other ones, right? A lot of the stuff is quite new. So, web and like desktop, like Ubuntu's come out with really great support for Flutter and Dart. Like a lot of the stuff, like the frameworks and the libraries are catching up, right? Because null safety was a huge amount of effort to develop and get compatible, and then a lot of people have been using like they've been using like their standard iOS and Android libraries as kind of like a bridge to what you can do with Flutter and Dart. So I guess in the next year or two, you'll see support for web be a bit more mainstream, and then you'll see like like a lot of the packages and solutions kind of work on those platforms eventually. I know on the Amplify side, right? Like we've really invested in getting iOS and Android really slick and up to the same feature set as the rest of what we're doing with Amplify essentially. So we're trying as hard to do that. But as we go through and work through stuff next year, like we'll start looking at like what next, right? And based on community feedback, which is why Developers here. Like we can look at like what you guys' needs are.
Abdallah, what do you think? Like generally, I mean, there was one comment in the audience that specifically mentioned the tech stack, which was React. Do you think, or like, would you say that React is still the predominant front end language that people are using with Flutter?
With Flutter, I'm sorry. So
with Amplify, sorry.
with Amplify, I would say we definitely lean more towards like in general JavaScript at this point in time, and
Yep.
we're definitely growing significantly in the mobile space. At this point in time, I would say definitely like we've started our support with JavaScript, so that's where I would say the biggest number um, of available features that we have in developers is at this point in time.
Yep.
Yeah, I guess that question as well, like, React and React Native have been around for a while. Like last year, if I talked to developers, they were using, a bit more of Angular. So a lot of it comes down to popularity, and like, I guess like it's expensive to build native apps, but you get really good performance out of them, and so that's why people build native like iOS and Android apps alongside like a React web app for their projects. Some people decided to go down the all-in-one approach with React Native, and I've worked at startups building stuff in React Native as well, and it was really cool that you could release for Android and iOS pretty quickly. Although, like, it didn't really work as nicely as I'd like to get back to web. Although I know that like React for Web's become a thing, and you can save some of the business logic for React.
Yeah.
But the way that the you're no longer interacting with the DOM in React Native, so like components work slightly differently. There's like an abstraction layer added there, and some things are different.
Absolutely.
As I push this app up as well, like I know that we're right on time. So like React Native, I think is going to continue being quite popular, and maybe native for web might become more and more of a thing. But what we have seen is like there's been a lot of love for Dart and Flutter from the community. But what we have seen is like there's been I've got a bit of an echo. Yeah. So we're seeing like a lot of love from the community, and that's kind of like why I think the Amplify team's really invested in offering an experience there as well. We know that it's going to be growing. Dart's a pretty cool language. The performance of Flutter is actually really good. Like in a lot of situations, it can get close to native. So it's a little bit ahead of React. It takes a different approach. Everything's rendered to a canvas by default.
Absolutely.
So yeah.
And those are definitely our thoughts. Like we believe in both of those platforms. Like we're definitely investing in both React Native and Flutter as our basically hybrid development approaches for building apps. We don't see these platforms going away anytime soon, and the trend is suggesting that they're only growing in popularity. So I definitely echo everything that you've said, Matt. There's a lot of efficiencies that you gain from building an app once and deploying it across all of these different frameworks. So absolutely.
Yeah, people always ask me what's better, right? And it all comes down to it depends. Like, if you have people in your team that have really good JavaScript knowledge, and you want to build a mobile app, React Native, done, easy decision. If you really
trying
need
to build a game or something, maybe not.
Yeah, maybe not. And like maybe like you want something that's going to be like super performant for end users, and you want it to be a very native experience. You might, and you've got the budget and the engineering, team. Then you'd want to maybe build native, and then like Flutter's like a good. It sits in between, right? Like as another option, it's kind of like you get better performance sometimes. But you can't leverage your JavaScript developers. JavaScript developers, if you've got them, have to learn like a new language, or you'll have to hire for Dart or whatever. So yeah, it always comes down to it depends. And I actually really like working across everything. Right, at the end of the day, like it's fun.
Yeah.
So this is the project that I just created, right? Like it's just, is it deployed yet? Maybe it is. That was really fast. I know. Let me see.
I just set up the admin UI just because it takes a minute for it to.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Just double checking my project name. I called it Amplify, so it's still coming. So, like, one of the things that I do like to do, right, like Amplify is using CloudFormation under the hood, right? So you don't need to know about it as a new developer, but I like showing it off. Like the CLI is showing you what's happening in the background, but you can also have a look at like all the things that are in process as well. When it comes to generating this this application. So you can go in, you can have a look at the stack and the status, and you can see that it's in progress. You can see like a list of the resources that it creates. So so it's kind of cool that like all that Amplify really is an abstraction to give you the power of everything that's available in the cloud. So I know we're right on time. Do we want to wait for this project to deploy and then show off like admin UI for a quick second and then call it? Let us know in the chat. Let us know if you've got any other questions as well, because we can run a little bit over, or else what we can do is we can wrap up today. And I hope everyone's enjoyed the session if we want to take that option. We'll let the audience vote on this one, maybe, Paul.
Yeah, okay. There is a question from Brave Cobra. And that will fill a gap. And maybe if we also, Abdullah, maybe think of like one question, and maybe we can have a winner today. But Brave Cobra asks, how can Amplify fit in with an existing infrastructure as code expressed in Terraform?
Well, that's a good question, right? So you can always pull in the yarn details, right? And you can always go through, and I'll get that link back up actually. Where was it? We went there earlier today, right? So create or reuse existing assets. So this is the link that we're talking about. So Terraform, when it creates these resources, it's going to output the details for those resources. And then if you use Amplify, you can initiate auth for whatever it is that's a particular component. And then you put in like your Cognito pool ID, the like all those settings and things that Terraform's created in the back end.
Maybe it's good, Matt, to make that distinction between the Amplify CLI is the abstraction of creation of resources and so forth, like CloudFormation, but you can still consume AWS resources regardless of how they're deployed via the Amplify libraries, and you can self-configure and cook those things up as well.
Yep. Yeah. This has finished, I think. Let me just find the right region. Going to do some region hopping because of my CLI. Let's see. Did I create a US East one? I was doing a project in another region, and that's why I'm like, where is it created? Actually, what I'll do is I'll quickly look at the project.
Are your credentials definitely for
you
that
can
account that you're
you can also go to the CLI, and you can just basically do Amplify console, and that gives you the option to that automatically just redirects you to the console page.
There we go. Perfect. So I've just put that in the CLI. I swear I had it in Ohio, but I must be wrong. Oh no, it is Southeast too.
Here we
are. Here we go. And so we've got our data again. So that's all be generated.
There was that object that you put test.
Yeah, that's the test object. I'm too quick. We'll go back to that in a second. But this will take a few minutes, then we'll wrap up, and then we'll have a quick look at content, and then wrap it up for the day. I think it did deploy into the old 11 project that I had. So that's why I was getting confused. And then the endpoint for GraphQL was actually US West 2, which might just be the fact that I was working in that region for Mac EC2 like last week. So we can watch that, like go ahead and create all the resources, right? Similar to last time. Please let us know if you've got any questions in the chat as well. We're willing to, chat about anything while we're waiting. Give us a question.
And I do want to say that I've pasted in a link to our Amplify Flutter GitHub repo. Please feel free to use that to post in any issues that you might be facing while using the library. Also, to tell us about any features that you would like to see, that would be really great. We definitely use that as a signal for us to understand what it is that our developers really want to see. So just want to make sure I plug that in there.
Perfect. Do we have a question for the audience? Maybe like, do we want to send a particular prize?
I mean, like, do you have a question that we maybe covered off today, Abdallah, that we could ask?
Trying to think. Oh, I do have a question. What database does the API category in Amplify use behind the scenes?
First one to answer that in the chat. You'll have to DM me. But let's go maybe like a. Oh, what do we want to give away?
Is it RDS? Is it RDS?
Nope.
Unfortunately, it's not.
No, it's not. Close.
We definitely covered it off. Oh, Tori got it.
There we go.
Yep, Tori got it. It is DynamoDB.
Perfect. Well, Tori, I'll contact you in the chat. I think my username's Matt Cole, so I'll ping you. I'm thinking a Fire TV maybe.
Nice. That's a nice prize.
That's awesome.
Yep. You must MN Dio. You're a little bit slow. Maybe next time we'll offer some prizes throughout the next couple of weeks, especially leading into Christmas.
Yeah, Master Medio. You maybe just come along next week and we'll have a prize as well.
Okay, here we go. So it looks like some extra stuff's happening here as well. This is like, like I always think of it as like, like my code's compiling, back in the day when I was writing Objective-C, that would be the perfect time for me to grab a coffee. Nowadays, developing on cloud, it's just waiting for those cloud resources. Oh, here we go.
Yep. So that's the command, like right at the very top there, where if you'd made some sort of changes within your Amplify project, you could pull those changes locally. The same as if like somebody on a remote branch in Git pushed something up, you want to pull those changes back down. That's exactly what you've got to do. So,
yep, yeah, exactly. And like once you've set that up ID and environment name, I'm pretty sure you can just do an Amplify pull, right? So you don't have to remember the rest of the details after that, unless you want to change environments from like dev to UAT or whatever. So yeah, like test. What I might do is I might make this.
Actually, if you do that, then it's gonna
redeploy. Yeah,
so
right. Let's go to content.
Exactly. Let's go to content and show that view.
Suspenseful.
It is. I can hear those pigeons, Paul.
I've got like they always come sometime in the show, and I think maybe like because it rained, there's like some worms out or something. I don't know.
Well, it's also like I learned the other day, like Australia just we get all the European animals imported, right? Like we got foxes. One of the things that was imported like were pigeons. I don't know who back in the day said let's load pigeons on boats, but like the pigeons that you hear in the background on Paul's are European pigeons, and so they're not actually native to Australia. And one thing that I noticed is it's actually fighting season for them. They fight each other. Okay, here we go. What have we got? They fight each other.
You can just try to refreshing your screen.
Yeah, let's do that. So they're quite aggressive. I didn't realize you could get aggressive pigeons, which is really interesting. They're not like our nice magpies in Australia. If anyone's familiar with them.
Like Brave Cobra asks, why is this really slow? And it's like, I would put that down to like live coding. Like, do something.
You've got to remember it's Australian internet. Yeah, it's Australian internet as well, right? So
I mean, the guys are in a shed, so let's be real.
That's right. And it's raining. You like 5 years ago, we would have just called it quits for the day. Like, oh, it's raining, our internet's going to be down all day, so we'll just have to go offline.
Yep.
Would you mind if I maybe share my screen and show you my app?
Yeah, let's do that. That's easier.
All right. Let me see.
Yeah, pigeon fighting season. It's real. Google it. European pigeons, very aggressive. Usually I worry about magpies, right? Magpie swooping season was last month and the month before.
All right.
Here we go.
Able to see my screen? All right. Okay. So inside of the content screen, you can see here that, well, first of all, in my data model, I have two models here. So I have the trips model and I have my user records. And I also have a relationship that I've created between the trip and the user that is actually that are actually invited to that trip. This is very much an incomplete model because I also need to create a relationship for the user that I've actually created the trip, but I'm still working on it. And then if I go into the content section, I'll end up seeing here is that you can select the table, which basically corresponds to the different models that you've created. And once you select the one that you need, you can click on it, and you can manage fully any of the information that's available within that model, which is really, really great. And also, if you have any relationships that have been created, you can see that those are already available here for you to be able to even link the created element within that model to what it needs to be linked to. So an example of this would be if I want to invite users to this trip and I have existing users that have been created previously, then I can add those here. And that's just really simple and easy to do.
And so if you went to DynamoDB, we should be able to see this exactly, right, in the table?
Exactly, yes. So if I go,
Tori asks, is this admin UI section in beta? No, it's not. Like,
it's been out for over a year now. I think it was it reInvent last year, if I remember correctly? Could be completely
I'm
wrong.
not entirely sure, honestly.
Yeah.
So
still the new guy.
JW1, I asked the exact same question that I think we're going through. Are those models directly related to DynamoDB table? Is it something you could query in DynamoDB yourself using AWS CLI or any other library?
Yes, the answer to that is yes. All of that information is available basically inside of DynamoDB, and you can query it using DynamoDB. So this is an example of all of that information that I have within my model. And also what you can do here is what you've talked about, Matt, for generating data. So what I can do here, let's say that I want more data here. I don't want just 2 trips. I can click on auto generate data and I can add 100. I can put in constraints, for example, for different validations that I want on the type of data that's being created. And then once I generate it, all right, you can see that now it's starting to create all of that fake data for me so that I can use it for my testing. And another thing that I want to show here as well is once you got auth connected, you also have the ability to see all of your users. And from here, you're also able to basically go into the user and be able to see the account status, whether it was confirmed or not. Because whenever you register a user with Cognito, you need to use a confirmation code to allow that user to be able to log in. And you'll also be able to see whether they have MFA enabled. For me, I had opted in to not use MFA at this point in time in building the app, but that's whenever that's enabled, then that basically gets added to the user profile as well. And that's it. That's what I wanted to show.
That's very awesome. We can see a couple more questions in there. We'll stay on for a little bit longer and then we'll wrap it up. But why when Amplify over CDK and CloudFormation? My answer to that's just like Amplify is generating CloudFormation in the background, right? So use that. We talked about importing existing resources that can be done as well. We have a lot of customers that will build their resources in CDK and then reference with reference in the imports command for Amplify as well. So there's no best way or better way to do things, right? Like me and Paul are really big CDK fans. We'll talk more about it in a couple of weeks, but we've done a lot of work on CDK in previous streams. if we want to build it that way, we will. Other times, Amplify CLI is just really easy to get started, right? And I think over time, like more and more, like whether you use Amplify CDK or CloudFormation is going to be just basically project based and easier, right? Like in terms of the flows. Like last year, I didn't see any way to bring in existing assets very easily into Amplify that was generated with CDK. Now we've got blogs on it, and people have kind of showed everyone the house. It's a lot easier. So that's kind of what I'd say to that. So the next one is two tables, right? DynamoDB best practices. Paul, did you want to take a bite at this one?
I mean, the answer is going to be like, it depends, right? There's like modeling data within DynamoDB is like difficult. Like it is difficult, and is in a mind shift to what you want to do. I think that I mean, once you're very familiar, it might make sense to have a single table design. Depends on what you're doing. But I guess it's probably a little more. It's still like very common that people will have multiple tables. Like I will do that myself with multiple different tables. So yeah, I would say like it depends. DynamoDB best practice. I don't really know whether we specifically call out that is the best practice. It is a practice that some people find like very good, and they really like that. I will just answer that as like it really depends what you want to do there. And remember, like a lot of that relationship there is being set up. That's look, if you've got some mechanism that you want a single table design over that, you can go ahead and do that custom yourself. But if you're using these tools to go ahead and build things like quickly, it's probably more familiar to think about like different tables and primary keys and secondary keys and how those interact with each other. I guess that's why, like through that, that WYSIWYG editor, that it sets it up that way. I'm making that assumption there.
Well, the other thing is like Amplify is kind of agnostic. It's how you want to build your schema structure is what it's going to produce for that lab. We had two tables, and that was just because we thought that the data was massively different to each other. I really liked JW01's answer here as well. So that's a good answer too. It depends, right? It's always app specific and the problems that you're trying to solve and what's going to work best for you.
Yeah, I guess once you put everything all in one table, then you need like global secondary indexes. Like you need to think about like what you're doing and how you're accessing your data as well. Probably just simpler to do it over multiple tables. So yeah, I think it always depends.
Perfect. Well, let's wrap it up for today. Thanks. Really appreciated the audience. Towards the end, I really love it when everyone's really interactive and asking questions, and you can pull us up on things as well. That's always fine too. And glad to know that you like our our pigeon conversations and all the randomness that we bring in sometimes. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show today, Abdallah. We'll have to have you back as new things happen in the React Native and Flutter spaces. Over the next year, I'm sure there'll be some things that you'll be excited to show people about, and so we'd be more than happy to have you back on the stream. But for now, we'll say good night, good morning, or whatever it is to everyone, and we'll catch you all same time next week. Thanks, everyone.
That answers our last question. So same time next week. And thanks so much, Abdallah, for coming along. It was a great session.
Yeah, absolutely.